Tonight, we're drifting back through time, slowly tracing the quiet evolution of something that began as a simple dream about catching insects in the fading countryside of Japan. There's a gentle comfort in remembering how small ideas can unfold into worlds that millions of people come to call home, how a single spark of imagination can light up generations. Before you drift off, maybe tap subscribe for more relaxing videos, and tell me where you're watching from tonight. The story we're about to explore together isn't loud or rushed, it's patient and layered, unfolding decade by decade like pages turning in the stillness of evening. From the pixelated screens of handheld devices to the sprawling landscapes that now fill our televisions. This journey has always been about connection, about the soft thrill of discovery, and about the way certain memories linger long after the game has been turned off. In the quiet corners of 1996, a man named Satoshi Tajiri was finishing something he'd been dreaming about since childhood. He'd grown up in Machida, a suburb near Tokyo, where forests and streams once offered endless places to explore, places where children hunted for beetles and butterflies with simple nets and jars. But as the years passed, those natural spaces were swallowed by buildings and roads, and Tajiri watched the wilderness of his youth disappear beneath concrete and glass. He wanted to preserve that feeling somehow, that sense of wonder when you turn over a rock and discover something alive and beautiful hiding underneath. So he began working on a game, a world where children could experience that same thrill of discovery, but through pixels and code instead of dirt and leaves. He teamed up with Ken Sugimori, an artist who would go on to define the visual language of this entire universe, and together with programmer Junichi Masuda, they founded a small studio called Game Freak in 1989. Their early projects were modest, quirky little games that didn't make much noise, but they were building towards something bigger, something that would eventually redefine what a video game could be. The Game Boy was already a few years old by the mid-90s, a handheld device that let people carry entire adventures in their pockets, and Tajiri saw it as the perfect canvas for his vision. He imagined a world where creatures lived in the grass and caves, where you could capture them with special devices called Pokeballs, where you could train them and battle them and trade them with your friends through a cable that linked two Game Boys together. It was a vision born from nostalgia and innovation, from the past and the future meeting in a single cartridge. On February 27th, 1996, the first two games were released in Japan, Pokémon Red and Pokémon Green, and they introduced players to the Kanto region, a place modeled loosely after the real Kanto plain in Japan, filled with towns and routes and hidden corners waiting to be explored. You began your journey in Pallet Town, a quiet little place where the colors were muted and the music was simple, and you were given a choice that would define your entire adventure. Would you choose Bulbasaur, the grass and poison type with a bulb on its back, or Charmander, the fire type whose tail flame burned with fierce determination, or Squirtle, the water type with a friendly face and a protective shell? This choice mattered, not just mechanically, but emotionally, because whichever creature you picked would become your partner, your companion, through every battle and every victory. The goal of the game was straightforward on the surface. You were meant to travel across Kanto, challenging 8 gym leaders who specialized in different types of Pokémon, earning badges that proved your skill, and eventually confronting the Elite Four, the strongest trainers in the region, to claim the title of champion. But beneath that simple structure was something deeper, a world that encouraged exploration and curiosity, that rewarded players who wandered off the main path and talked to every character and searched every corner. There was a device called the Pokédex, an encyclopedia that recorded every species you encountered, and filling it became an obsession for many players, a quiet goal that extended far beyond the credits. The game wasn't just about winning, it was about collecting, about completing something, about the satisfaction of seeing that number climb higher and higher until you'd documented every creature in the region. And then there was the trading system, a mechanic that transformed the entire experience from solitary to social, because certain Pokemon could only be obtained by trading with someone who owned the opposite version of the game. If you had red, you needed someone with green to complete your collection, and this simple design choice turned playgrounds and schoolyards into bustling marketplaces where kids negotiated and swapped and built friendships over linked cables. By late 1996, the games had become a quiet sensation in Japan, not an explosive hit at first, but a slow burn that grew through word of mouth and playground conversations. Nintendo saw the potential and began refining the formula for an international audience, and in 1998, Pokémon Red and Blue were released in North America, with Blue serving as an enhanced version that included updated graphics and minor improvements. Around the same time, a special edition called Pokémon Yellow was released in Japan, designed to mirror the anime series that had begun airing in 1997, and this version gave players Pikachu as their starter, a yellow electric mouse with rosy cheeks who would follow you around on screen, visible in the overworld like a loyal companion. Pikachu hadn't even been part of the original plan. It was a late addition to the roster, designed to be cute and marketable, but through a combination of excellent design and strategic promotion, it became the face of the entire franchise, more recognizable than any other creature, more iconic than even the legendary Pokémon that guarded the deepest secrets of the world. The anime played a massive role in this transformation because it took the world of the games and brought it to life with movement and voice and emotion. On April 1st, 1997, the very first episode aired in Japan, introducing viewers to Ash Ketchum, a 10-year-old boy from Pallet Town who dreamed of becoming a Pokemon master, and his partner Pikachu, who started out disobedient and distant, but gradually became his closest friend. The anime took liberties with the source material, expanding the lore and adding characters who didn't exist in the games, but it captured something essential about the experience, that sense of adventure and discovery, that feeling of setting out into a world much larger than yourself. The show was designed to appeal to children, with bright colors and simple storylines and lessons about friendship and perseverance. But it also had moments of genuine emotion, scenes where characters struggled and failed and had to pick themselves up again, moments that resonated with viewers of all ages. Team Rocket became beloved antagonists, not because they were threatening, but because they were funny and pathetic and strangely endearing, always chasing after Pikachu with elaborate schemes that never quite worked, always blasting off into the sky with the same recycled animation and catchphrase. The anime became a phenomenon in its own right, eventually spanning over 1,000 episodes across multiple series, each one set in a different region, each one introducing new Pokémon and new characters while maintaining the core formula that had made it successful in the first place. But the anime also courted controversy, most notably with an episode that aired in December of 1997, a story about a digital world where Ash and his friends entered a computer system to stop a villain. During one sequence, Pikachu used an electric attack that caused a series of rapid flashing lights, red and blue strobing at a frequency that triggered photosensitive epilepsy in hundreds of viewers, sending children to hospitals across Japan with seizures and nausea. The incident became international news, a rare moment where a piece of media caused actual physical harm, and the episode was never aired again, pulled from circulation permanently. The franchise paused for several months while producers implemented stricter guidelines about flashing lights and color patterns, and when the anime returned, it did so with new safety protocols in place. Strangely, Porygon, the digital Pokemon featured in that episode, bore no actual responsibility for the problematic visuals, those were, caused by Pikachu's attack, but Porygon and its entire evolutionary line were effectively banned from major anime appearances afterward, an unfortunate casualty of being associated with the controversy. As the anime spread across the world, so too did the trading card game, which launched in Japan in October of 1996, just months after the video games. The cards were produced by Media Factory, a company that specialized in collectibles, and they offered a different way to experience the world of Pokémon, a strategic battle system where players built decks around their favorite creatures and used energy cards to power their attacks. The rules were simpler than other trading card games of the era, accessible enough for children, but deep enough to reward careful planning and deck construction. By the time the cards reached North America in 1999, distributed by Wizards of the Coast, the company behind Magic the Gathering, they had already become a cultural phenomenon in Japan, and they exploded internationally with a fervor that surprised even the most optimistic projections. Suddenly, Pokemon cards were everywhere, tucked into backpacks and binders, traded on playgrounds during recess, displayed in protective sleeves like treasures. Rare cards, like the first edition holographic Charizard, became objects of intense desire, worth hundreds of dollars even then, and the secondary market for cards began to rival the games themselves in terms of cultural impact. Schools started banning the cards, worried about theft and gambling-like behavior, and parents debated whether the hobby was harmless fun or a gateway to obsession. But the cards kept selling, kept evolving, kept introducing new mechanics and new rarities, and today the Pokémon trading card game remains one of the most successful collectible card games in the world, with tournaments and championships and a dedicated community that spans generations. If you're still awake halfway through, maybe subscribe before you drift off, and tell me what time it is where you're watching from. The success of the first generation established patterns that would define the franchise for decades, patterns of gameplay and design and marketing that became so familiar they felt inevitable. Every few years, a new generation of games would arrive, introducing a new region to explore, a new set of Pokémon to catch, new mechanics to learn, and new stories to experience. Generation 2 arrived in November of 1999 with Pokémon Gold and Silver, games set in the Johto region, a place inspired by the Kansai area of Japan, known for its traditional culture and historical landmarks. Johto felt different from Kanto, more serene and mystical, with towns built around ancient temples and towers, with legends about legendary Pokémon who controlled time and space and emotion. The games introduced 100 new species, expanding the Pokédex and giving players fresh creatures to discover, and they also introduced new types, Dark and Steel, which helped balance the metagame by providing counters to the overpowered Psychic types from Generation 1. Steel types were defensive powerhouses, resistant to a staggering number of attack types, while Dark types were specifically designed to exploit the weaknesses of Psychic and Ghost Pokémon, creating new strategies and team compositions. Gold and Silver also introduced the concept of time. The games ran on an internal clock that tracked the real-world day and night cycle, and certain Pokémon could only be found at specific times, certain events only triggered during morning or evening hours. This added a layer of realism and immersion, a sense that the world continued to exist even when you weren't playing, that the sun rose and set in Johto just like it did outside your window. Trainers you'd already beaten would call you on the Pokégear, the in-game phone system, asking for rematches or sharing gossip about rare sightings, and this made the world feel more alive, more populated with characters who had their own routines and personalities. Baby Pokemon were introduced, pre-evolutions of existing species like Pichu and Cleffa and Igglybuff, creatures that could only be obtained by breeding two compatible Pokemon at the daycare, a mechanic that added depth to team building and collection. And perhaps most remarkably, after you defeated the Elite Four and became champion of Johto, the game didn't end. Instead, it opened up the entire Kanto region from the first games, now 3 years older and slightly changed, allowing you to revisit familiar locations and challenge the original gym leaders once more, now stronger and more experienced. This was an unprecedented amount of content for a Game Boy game, 2 full regions in a single cartridge, and it cemented Gold and Silver as some of the most beloved entries in the series. The third generation arrived in November of 2002 with Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire, games set in the Hoenn region, a tropical area inspired by Kyushu, the southernmost of Japan's main islands. Hoenn was defined by water, with vast ocean routes and diving mechanics that let you explore underwater caves and trenches, with weather patterns that changed the appearance of routes and affected battle conditions. The games introduced double battles, where you controlled 2 Pokemon at once and your opponent did the same, adding new layers of strategy because moves could now target allies or multiple enemies, because abilities and typing interactions became far more complex. Abilities were themselves a new mechanic, passive traits that gave each Pokemon unique characteristics, some boosting stats in certain conditions, others preventing status effects or changing the weather when the Pokemon entered battle. This added another dimension to team building, because now you had to consider not just types and moves, but also how abilities interacted with your overall strategy. Hoenn's story revolved around 2 villainous teams, Team Aqua and Team Magma, who wanted to awaken ancient legendary Pokemon to expand the ocean or the land respectively, believing that their vision of the world was the correct one. The conflict was more serious than previous games, dealing with themes of environmentalism and the consequences of unchecked ambition, and the climax involved stopping a catastrophic weather event that threatened to drown or scorch the entire region. Ruby and Sapphire were also the first games to appear on the Game Boy Advance, Nintendo's new handheld system, and they took full advantage of the improved hardware with richer colors, more detailed sprites, and more complex animations. But this technical leap came at a cost. The games were not compatible with the previous generation. You couldn't transfer Pokemon from Gold and Silver to Ruby and Sapphire, at least not at launch. This decision upset many players who had spent years building their collections, who had rare event Pokemon and carefully bred teams that suddenly couldn't be moved forward, and it created a rift in the community that took years to heal. Eventually, Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, remakes of the original Red and Blue, were released in January of 2004, along with the PAL Park feature in the 4th generation games, which allowed limited transfers from the 3rd generation, but the damage had been done, and many players never recovered their original teams. The 4th generation launched in September of 2006 with Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, games set in the Sinnoh region, a place inspired by Hokkaido, Japan's northernmost island, known for its cold climate and mountainous terrain. Sinnoh felt epic in scale, with towering peaks like Mount Coronet that divided the region in half, with sprawling routes that required multiple visits to fully explore, with a mythology that delved deeper into the origins of the Pokemon world than any previous game. The legendary Pokemon of Sinnoh were gods, beings that had shaped reality itself. Dialga controlled time, Palkia controlled space, and Giratina ruled over an antimatter dimension called the Distortion World, a place where physics worked differently and gravity shifted unpredictably. The story involved Team Galactic, a villainous organization led by a man named Cyrus, who wanted to destroy the current universe and create a new one without emotion, without spirit, without the imperfections he saw in humanity. It was a darker narrative, one that touched on nihilism and existential despair, and the climax at the Spear Pillar, where you confronted Cyrus as he attempted to summon the gods, remains one of the most memorable moments in the entire series. Diamond and Pearl ran on the Nintendo DS, a system with two screens and touch controls, and the games used the bottom screen for various functions, displaying maps and Pokémon status, and the new Pokétch, a digital watch with apps that tracked your party's health and happiness, and even let you check the time of day. The physical and special split, a mechanical change that had been requested by competitive players for years, was finally implemented. Each individual move was now classified as physical or special based on how it was performed rather than just its type, and this allowed for more diverse movesets and better utilization of a Pokémon's stat distribution. The game also introduced online functionality through the Nintendo Wi-Fi connection, allowing players to trade and battle with strangers across the world, not just friends but with link cables, and this opened up the competitive scene in ways that had never been possible before. Players could test their teams against a global pool of opponents, could participate in online tournaments, could access the global trade station to search for specific Pokémon they needed to complete their Pokédex. It was a turning point, the moment when Pokémon became a truly international community, rather than just a series of isolated playgroups. The fifth generation arrived in September of 2010 with Pokémon Black and White, games set in the Unova region, a place inspired by New York City and the greater New York metropolitan area, the first region based on a location outside of Japan. Unova was modern and urban, filled with skyscrapers and bridges and bustling cities with a cosmopolitan energy that felt different from the more pastoral regions that had come before. The games introduced a completely new Pokédex of 156 species, and for the main story, you could only encounter and catch these new Pokémon. The older generations were locked away until after you became champion. This was a controversial decision. Some players loved the fresh start, the sense of discovery that came from encountering creatures they'd never seen before, while others felt alienated, cut off from the Pokémon they'd grown attached to over the years. But the decision forced the designers to create a diverse and balanced roster, and many of the new Pokémon became instant favorites, creatures like Excadrill and Volcarona and Chandelure that offered unique typing combinations and interesting designs. Black and White also told a more complex story than previous games, one that questioned the fundamental premise of the franchise, the ethical implications of capturing wild creatures and making them fight for human entertainment. The antagonist, a man named N, believed that Pokémon were suffering under human ownership, that they deserved to be free, and he had some compelling arguments, backed by a villainous organization called Team Plasma that preached liberation while secretly exploiting the Pokémon for their own gain. The narrative didn't provide easy answers. It forced you to confront uncomfortable questions about the relationship between trainers and their Pokémon, about whether consent could exist in a system where creatures were captured against their will. The resolution involved proving through your bond with your team that partnership could be genuine, that Pokémon could choose to stay with trainers because they wanted to, because they believed in the journey, but the game never dismissed N's concerns entirely. It left room for ambiguity and interpretation, and that made it more mature and thought-provoking than any Pokémon story before it. The sixth generation debuted in October of 2013 with Pokémon X and Y, games set in the Kalos region, a place inspired by France, filled with elegant architecture and sprawling gardens and a focus on beauty and artistry. Kalos was the first region rendered in full three dimensions. The games ran on the Nintendo 3DS and used polygonal models instead of sprites, allowing the camera to rotate and zoom, allowing battles to feel more dynamic and cinematic. The visual leap was stunning. Seeing your Pokemon move and attack in three dimensions, seeing the environment stretch out in all directions, it felt like stepping into a world that had only existed in your imagination until now. The games introduced Mega Evolution, a temporary transformation that certain Pokemon could undergo during battle if they held a specific Megastone and their trainer possessed a Keystone. Mega Evolution boosted stats and sometimes changed abilities or typing, turning familiar Pokemon into powerful new forms, and it added a layer of strategy because you could only Mega Evolve one Pokemon per battle, so you had to choose the right moment. Fan favorites like Charizard and Mewtwo received Mega Evolutions, along with dozens of others, and the mechanic became central to the competitive scene, defining the metagame for years. X and Y also introduced the Fairy type, a new classification designed to counter the overpowered Dragon types that had dominated the competitive scene since their introduction. Fairy types were immune to Dragon moves, super effective against them, and they provided a much-needed check on the dominance of Pokémon like Garchomp and Salamence. The type also had a whimsical, magical aesthetic, with Pokemon like Sylveon and Klefki and Xerneas embodying grace and charm, and it added a new dimension to the type chart, creating new strategies and team compositions. The games featured a more streamlined story, less focused on ethical questions, and more on spectacle and adventure, with a villainous team called Team Flare, trying to activate an ancient weapon that could wipe out most life on the planet to preserve beauty and resources for a select few. It was a darker plot than it initially appeared, but the game moved quickly through it, more interested in showing off the new region and mechanics than dwelling on heavy themes. The seventh generation launched in November of 2016 with Pokemon Sun and Moon, games set in the Alola region, a tropical paradise inspired by Hawaii, made up of 4 islands connected by boat and later by flying Pokemon. Alola felt like a vacation, a slower-paced adventure that emphasized exploration and culture, with traditions and rituals woven into the gameplay. The game replaced gyms with trials, challenges that tested your skills in unconventional ways, puzzles and hunts, and battles against powerful totem Pokemon that could call for help, summoning allies mid-fight to overwhelm you. At the end of each island's trials, you faced a kahuna, a respected elder who served as the island's strongest trainer, and these battles felt more personal, more connected to the culture of the region. The story revolved around Ultra Beasts, extra-dimensional creatures that had entered Alola through rifts in space, and your goal was to protect the region while uncovering the mystery of these beings. The Ultra Beasts were designed to look alien, fundamentally different from normal Pokemon, with bizarre proportions and unsettling appearances, and they added a sense of otherworldly danger to the narrative. Sun and Moon removed several mechanics that had been staples for years. Hidden machines, or HMs, were replaced with ride Pokemon, creatures you could summon to surf, or fly or break rocks without needing to teach your team specific moves, and this freed up move slots, allowed for more flexible team building, and eliminated one of the most frustrating aspects of previous games. The Battle Tree replaced the Battle Maison as the post-game challenge, offering tough opponents and rare items for those who wanted to test their skills, and the Festival Plaza served as an online hub where you could interact with other players, trade, battle, and participate in mini-games. The games also introduced regional forms, alternate versions of Pokemon from previous generations that had adapted to Alola's environment, creatures like Alolan Vulpix, which became an ice type, or Alolan Exeggutor, which grew absurdly tall and gained a dragon typing. These forms added new life to familiar species, gave players reasons to use Pokemon they might have overlooked, and hinted at how the world of Pokemon was more diverse and complex than the games had previously shown. The 8th generation arrived in November of 2019 with Pokemon Sword and Shield, game set in the Galar region, a place inspired by the United Kingdom, filled with rolling countryside and industrial cities, and a culture centered around Pokemon battles as spectator sports. Galar introduced the Wild Area, a massive open zone where the camera was free, where weather changed dynamically, where high-level Pokemon roamed alongside low-level ones, where you could see creatures wandering in the overworld before engaging them. It was the first step toward a truly open-world Pokemon game, a glimpse of what the series could become if it fully embraced exploration and freedom. The games also introduced Dynamaxing, a mechanic that let any Pokemon grow to massive size for 3 turns during battle, boosting their HP and turning their moves into powerful max moves with additional effects. Dynamaxing replaced Mega Evolution and Z-moves, the gimmick from the previous generation, and while some players missed those mechanics, others appreciated the accessibility of Dynamaxing, the fact that any Pokemon could use it rather than just a select few. But Sword and Shield also sparked one of the biggest controversies in the franchise's history when it was revealed that not all Pokemon would be available in the games, that the National Pokédex had been cut, limiting players to around 400 species out of the nearly 900 that existed at that point. This decision, which fans called Dexit, led to widespread backlash, petitions, and debates about the direction of the series. Game Freak explained that the decision was made to focus on quality, to ensure that the Pokemon that did appear were animated and balanced properly, but many players felt betrayed, especially those who had transferred their teams forward through every generation, who had Pokemon they'd been training for over a decade. The controversy lingered throughout the generation, even as the game sold over 20 million copies, even as downloadable content added more Pokemon back through expansion passes, the Isle of Armor, and the Crown Tundra, which introduced new areas to explore and new legendary Pokemon to catch. The debate highlighted a tension within the fan base, between those who wanted the series to evolve and take risks, and those who wanted it to preserve traditions and respect the investments players had made. As we drift a little deeper tonight, there's a quiet comfort in remembering how the series adapted to changing technology and player expectations, how it stumbled sometimes, but always found its footing again. The 9th generation launched in November of 2022 with Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, games set in the Paldea region, a place inspired by the Iberian Peninsula, specifically Spain and Portugal, filled with sun-drenched plazas and ancient ruins and vast open landscapes. Paldea was the first truly open-world region, with no routes or barriers, just a seamless map where you could go anywhere from the very start, where the only limits were the levels of the wild Pokémon and your own sense of adventure. The games offered 3 separate storylines that you could pursue in any order: the traditional gym challenge, a quest to find and defeat massive Titan Pokémon that guarded rare ingredients, and a campaign to dismantle Team Star, a group of rebellious students who had taken over parts of the region. This non-linear structure was liberating. It let you forge your own path, prioritize the content that interested you, and discover the world at your own pace. Scarlet and Violet also introduced terastallization, a mechanic that let any Pokémon change into a crystalline form and either boost their existing typing or gain a completely new type for the duration of the battle. Unlike Mega Evolution or Dynamaxing, terastallization was permanent until you recharged it at a Pokémon Center, and the type you terastallized into could be customized through special items, allowing for incredible strategic depth and unpredictability. The games were ambitious, perhaps too ambitious, because they launched with significant performance issues, frame rate drops, visual glitches, pop in that made the world feel unfinished. These technical problems overshadowed much of the game's innovation, and while patches improved things slightly, the damage to the game's reputation had already been done. Still, beneath the rough edges, Scarlet and Violet offered some of the most emotionally resonant storytelling the series had ever attempted, with characters who felt real, who struggled with identity and belonging, who grew and changed through their interactions with you and their Pokémon. The history of Pokémon isn't just about the main series games, though. It's also about the spin offs, the side projects that explore different genres and gameplay styles. Pokémon Snap, released for the Nintendo 64 in 1999, let players photograph Pokémon in their natural habitats, a peaceful game about observation rather than combat, about finding the perfect shot rather than capturing creatures. Pokémon Stadium, also on the Nintendo 64, brought Pokémon battles to the big screen with fully three-dimensional models and bombastic animations, letting players transfer their teams from the Game Boy games and watch them fight in living rooms around the world. The Pokémon Mystery Dungeon series, which began in 2005, turned the formula on its head by letting you play as a Pokémon rather than a trainer, exploring randomly generated dungeons and experiencing stories about friendship and sacrifice. The Pokémon Ranger series, which started in 2006, used the DS touchscreen to capture Pokémon by drawing circles around them, emphasizing cooperation and connection rather than domination. And Pokémon Conquest, a strategy RPG released in 2012, blended Pokémon with feudal Japanese warfare, creating a unique tactical experience that appealed to a different audience. But perhaps no spin-off has had the cultural impact of Pokémon Go, which launched in July of 2016 and became a global phenomenon almost overnight. Developed by Niantic, a company that specialized in augmented reality and location-based games, Pokémon Go used your smartphone's GPS and camera to overlay Pokémon onto the real world, encouraging you to walk around your neighborhood, your city, to discover creatures hiding in parks and landmarks and street corners. The game was simple, almost primitive compared to the main series, but it tapped into something primal, that urge to explore, to collect, to share your discoveries with others. Within days of launch, parks were filled with people staring at their phones, gathering at Pokestops to refill their items, forming impromptu groups to take down raid bosses, powerful Pokemon that required teamwork to defeat. The game had over 1 billion downloads and generated over $5 billion in revenue, and it brought Pokemon to people who had never played the video games, who had never watched the anime, who only knew the franchise by reputation. It proved that Pokemon could transcend its original medium, could exist in new forms, and reach new audiences, and it showed that the franchise's appeal wasn't tied to any single platform or format. It was about the fundamental joy of discovery and connection that had always been at its heart. The merchandise side of Pokémon has been just as successful, if not more so, than the games and anime. Plushies, figurines, apparel, accessories, Pokémon has been plastered on everything imaginable, from lunchboxes to bedsheets to high-end fashion collaborations with brands like Levi's and Vans, and then even Louis Vuitton. The Pokémon Center stores, official retail locations in Japan and later in other countries, became pilgrimage sites for fans, places where you could buy exclusive merchandise and limited edition items that weren't available anywhere else. Lines would form hours before opening for special releases, and rare plushies would sell out in minutes, creating a secondary market where collectors paid exorbitant prices for items they'd missed. The trading card game continued to thrive, with new sets released every few months, each one introducing new mechanics and new rarities, and the competitive scene grew into a global network of tournaments and championships where top players could win thousands of dollars in prizes and scholarships. The Pokemon World Championships, an annual event that brings together the best players from around the world to compete in the video games, the trading card game, and Pokemon Go, has become a celebration of the community, a place where fans gather to watch high-level play, to meet the developers, to cosplay as their favorite characters, to feel connected to something larger than themselves. The championship series is broadcast online, streamed to tens of thousands of viewers, analyzed and discussed like traditional sports, and the top players become celebrities within the community, known for their strategies and personalities. Pokemon has always understood that its strength lies in its community, in the bonds formed between players, and it has consistently created spaces, both physical and digital, where that community can thrive. Looking ahead, the future of Pokemon seems as boundless as it has ever been. The franchise announced Pokemon Legends ZA, a game set to release in 2025 that will return to the Kalos region and explore the city of Lumiose, focusing on urban redevelopment and the return of Mega Evolution. There are rumors of other projects, new spin-offs, potential collaborations, and the 10th generation of main series games, which will undoubtedly introduce another region, another 100 Pokemon, another gimmick to reshape the competitive landscape. The series faces challenges, certainly technical limitations, creative fatigue, the pressure to innovate while preserving what fans love, but it has faced challenges before and adapted, evolved, found new ways to surprise and delight. The core appeal of Pokemon, that sense of adventure and discovery, that bond between trainer and creature, remains as strong as it was in 1996, and as long as that core stays intact, the franchise will endure. The mythology woven through the games, the anime, and the supplementary materials has grown deeper and more complex with each passing year. The legendary Pokemon, once simple, powerful creatures, have become gods and guardians, beings tied to the fundamental forces of the universe. In the first generation, the legendary birds, Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres, were rare and powerful, but ultimately just Pokemon, creatures you could catch and add to your team. By the fourth generation, legendaries like Arceus were presented as the creator of all things, a deity that shaped the world itself, and confronting such a being carried weight, carried a sense of reverence that elevated the narrative beyond a simple children's game. The games never forced these myths on you. They were optional, hidden in item descriptions and NPC dialogue, waiting to be pieced together by players who cared to look, and this approach respected the player's intelligence, trusted them to engage with the world as deeply or as casually as they wanted. The Distortion World in Pokemon Platinum, the enhanced version of Diamond and Pearl released in September 2008, remains one of the most surreal and memorable locations in the series. It was a dimension where gravity didn't work properly, where you could walk on walls and ceilings, where waterfalls flowed upward and platforms floated in impossible arrangements. This was the home of Giratina, the antimatter Pokemon, banished there for its violence in ancient times, and entering this realm felt like stepping outside reality, like glimpsing something that shouldn't exist. The battle with Giratina, at the heart of this twisted place, was tense and atmospheric, accompanied by eerie music and shifting perspectives, and it showed that the series was capable of moments that felt genuinely unsettling, that challenged your perception of what a Pokemon game could be. The unknown, strange Pokemon shaped like letters of the alphabet have always existed at the fringes of the lore, hinting at deeper mysteries that the games never fully explain. Found primarily in the ruins of Alph in Johto, a place filled with ancient puzzles and hidden chambers, the unknowns seem to have some connection to reality itself, to the fabric that holds the world together. They appear in the third Pokemon movie, where they grant a young girl's wishes and nearly collapse the boundaries between dimensions, and they're referenced in cryptic inscriptions throughout the series, always suggesting that they know more than they reveal. This restraint, this willingness to leave questions unanswered, makes the world feel richer, more mysterious, like there are truths hidden just out of reach. The relationship between humans and Pokemon has been explored from countless angles over the years, sometimes joyful, sometimes complicated, always central to the themes of the series. In the games, this relationship is presented as mutually beneficial. Trainers help Pokemon grow stronger, and Pokemon help trainers achieve their dreams, and the bond between them is portrayed as genuine and reciprocal. But the series has also questioned this dynamic through characters like N in Black and White, through the existence of Pokemon that are explicitly described as suffering or exploited, through story beats that force you to consider whether your actions are justified. The anime takes a softer approach, showing Pokemon as willing participants who enjoy battling and training, who form deep emotional connections with their trainers, and the most memorable episodes are often the ones that focus on these relationships, on the quiet moments between trainer and Pokemon, rather than the flashy battles. Team Rocket, the villainous organization from the first generation, set the template for all future antagonist teams, groups with grand ambitions that ranged from silly to sinister. Rocket wanted to exploit Pokemon for profit, treating them as tools and commodities, and their leader Giovanni was a gym leader by day and crime boss by night, a man who valued power above all else. But Team Rocket in the anime, specifically the trio of Jesse, James, and Meowth, became something else entirely, comic relief characters who were more lovable than threatening, who failed at every scheme but never gave up, who occasionally showed flashes of genuine depth and vulnerability. Their devotion to each other, their stubborn refusal to quit despite endless failures, made them endearing, and over the course of 1,000 episodes, they became as iconic as Ash and Pikachu themselves. Subsequent villainous teams grew more ambitious in their goals. Team Aqua and Team Magma wanted to reshape the world itself, expanding the ocean or the land to create what they saw as a paradise, oblivious to the catastrophic consequences. Team Galactic sought to destroy the universe and rebuild it without emotion, a nihilistic plan born from their leader's despair. Team Plasma preached liberation while secretly enslaving Pokemon, a hypocritical organization whose internal conflicts drove much of the fifth generation's narrative. And Team Flare wanted to exterminate most life to preserve beauty and resources, a genocidal plan wrapped in a veneer of elegance. Each team reflected different anxieties and themes, from environmentalism to existentialism to inequality, and while the games rarely dwelled on these themes for long, their presence added depth and maturity to the stories. As slowly as the season changes, the competitive battling scene grew from playground disputes to a global phenomenon. In the early days, battling was simple. You picked 4 moves, you chose your Pokemon based on typing and stats, and you hoped for the best. But as players began to understand the underlying mechanics, the hidden stats and breeding possibilities, and move combinations, a metagame emerged, a complex ecosystem of strategies and counters where success required knowledge and planning as much as luck. Online forums and communities sprang up dedicated to analyzing these mechanics, to breeding perfect Pokemon with optimal stat distributions, to testing teams and sharing strategies. Terms like EV training and IV breeding and nature manipulation became common knowledge among competitive players, concepts that were never explained in the games themselves, but could be reverse engineered through experimentation and data mining. The introduction of online battling in the fourth generation accelerated this evolution because now you could test your teams against skilled opponents from around the world rather than just the AI or local friends. Smogon, a fan run website and community, became the de facto authority on competitive Pokemon, establishing tiers based on usage rates, banning particularly overpowered strategies, and creating rule sets that aimed for balanced and enjoyable matches. The official Pokemon Company eventually embraced competitive play, hosting regional and international tournaments with strict rule sets and prize pools, legitimizing a scene that had grown organically from the grassroots. Top players studied the metagame, like chess grandmasters, memorizing matchups and predicting trends, and the depth of strategy available in Pokemon battles surprised those who dismissed the series as a children's game. The role of luck in competitive Pokemon has always been contentious, because even the most carefully planned strategy can be derailed by a critical hit or a miss or a status effect, and some players argue that this randomness undermines the skill-based aspects of the game, while others see it as an essential part of the experience, a reminder that even the best-laid plans can go awry. The games include mechanics like accuracy and evasion that can swing matches in unpredictable ways, and certain moves like Guillotine and Fissure can instantly knock out any Pokemon regardless of stats, though they have low accuracy to balance their power. These elements ensure that no match is ever truly decided until it's over, that comebacks are always possible, and they keep the experience dynamic and engaging even after thousands of battles. Shiny Pokemon, alternate color variations that appear with a 1 in 4,096 chance in the wild, have become objects of obsession for many players, rare enough to feel special, visible enough to show off. Encountering a shiny in the wild is thrilling, a flash of unexpected color that makes your heart race, and players have developed elaborate methods to increase their odds. From breeding thousands of eggs, to chaining encounters, to resetting their games over and over until the stars align. Some players have spent hundreds of hours hunting specific shinies, driven by the desire to own something rare, something that proves their dedication. The games have gradually made shinies more accessible, introducing mechanics like the Masuda method and shiny charms that improve the odds, but they remain rare enough to feel meaningful, rare enough that seeing one still sparks joy. As the night deepens and our journey through time continues, there's a gentle rhythm to how certain elements have remained constant even as the series evolved. The music of Pokémon, composed by talents like Junichi Masuda and Go Ichinose and Shota Kageyama, has always been one of its most enduring strengths, memorable melodies that evoke specific emotions and locations. The opening notes of Pallet Town's theme carry a sense of home and nostalgia, a simple tune that feels like a beginning. The Lavender Town theme, with its haunting melody and minor key, creates an atmosphere of unease and melancholy, perfectly suited to a town defined by loss and mourning. The legendary battle themes, especially those for encounters with mascot legendaries, are epic and urgent, layered with orchestral instruments and driving rhythms that make the fights feel monumental. And the rival battle themes, evolving from playful to serious as your rival grows stronger, reflect the shifting dynamic between you and your closest competitor. The sound design extends beyond music to the cries of the Pokemon themselves, each species given a unique vocalization that helps define its character. Pikachu's voice, provided by Aikwe Otani, became so iconic that it was used in the game starting with Pokemon Yellow, replacing the synthesized cry, and later games gave certain other Pokemon their anime voices, like Eevee in Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. But most Pokemon still use the classic synthesized cries, digitized sounds that feel both alien and familiar. And these cries have become as recognizable as the designs themselves. You can hear a Pokemon's cry and instantly know which species it is, even if you haven't played the games in years. The visual design of Pokemon, led by Ken Sugimori and a team of talented artists, has always balanced simplicity with personality, creating creatures that are immediately recognizable and endlessly marketable. The early designs were constrained by the limitations of the Game Boy's screen, needing to be readable in a 16 by 16 pixel space, and this forced the designers to focus on strong silhouettes and bold shapes, characteristics that have remained even as the hardware improved. Some designs are based on real animals, like Pikachu being inspired by a mouse, or Charizard by a dragon, while others are more abstract, like Voltorb being a living Pokeball, or Clink being a set of gears. Some Pokemon are cute and friendly, designed to appeal to children, while others are intimidating and powerful, designed to feel like worthy opponents. And some are just weird, creatures like Dunsparce or Stunfisk that defy easy categorization, that exist because the designers wanted to try something unconventional. The evolution mechanic, one of the most fundamental aspects of the series, adds a sense of progression and growth that keeps players engaged. Watching your starter evolve for the first time is a rite of passage, a moment that feels earned, a transformation that signals you're making progress. Some Pokemon evolve through simple leveling, reaching a certain threshold and changing form, while others require specific conditions, friendship, or trading or held items or locations, and these requirements add depth to the collection aspect, encouraging players to experiment and explore. Evolution changes not just appearance, but stats and move pools, sometimes drastically, and certain Pokemon become viable only after evolving, while others are strongest in their base forms. The decision of whether to evolve a Pokemon or keep it as is, perhaps using an Everstone to prevent evolution, is one of the many small choices that make each player's journey unique. The Eevee line, with its multiple branching evolutions, has always been a fan favorite, a single species that can become eight different types depending on how it's raised. This flexibility makes Eevee feel special, like a Pokemon with infinite potential, and each evolution, or evolution as fans call them, has its own aesthetic and competitive niche. Vaporeon, the water type, is bulky and defensive. Jolteon, the electric type, is fast and offensive. Flareon, the fire type, has high attack but poor move pool. Espeon and Umbreon, the psychic and dark types introduced in gold and silver, evolve based on friendship and time of day, adding a layer of intention to their evolution. Leafeon and Glaceon, the grass and ice types from Diamond and Pearl, require leveling near specific locations. Sylveon, the fairy type from X and Y, evolves through high friendship and affection. Each new generation seemed to promise another evolution, and fans speculate endlessly about which types remain, hoping for a dragon or ghost or steel Eevee in future games. Regional forms, introduced in Sun and Moon, offered a way to revisit old Pokemon without simply reusing their designs, showing how creatures adapt to different environments and cultures. Alolan forms were the first, with Pokemon like Vulpix and Sandshrew gaining ice typing to reflect the snowy mountains of Alola, or Exeggutor growing absurdly tall and gaining dragon type because the tropical climate let it thrive. Galarian forms followed in Sword and Shield, with Pokemon like Ponyta becoming psychic type with pastel colors, or Zigzagoon gaining a dark type and an aggressive personality to reflect Galar's harsher environment. These forms breathed new life into familiar species, gave them new roles in the competitive scene, and suggested that the Pokemon world was more diverse than the games had previously shown, that creatures could change and adapt over generations just like real animals. Gigantamax forms, a special variant of Dynamaxing introduced in Sword and Shield, took certain Pokemon and gave them unique appearances and signature moves when they grew to massive size. Gigantamax Charizard gained fiery wings and a more draconic appearance. Gigantamax Pikachu returned to its original chubby design from the early games. Gigantamax Meowth became impossibly long. These forms were rare. Only certain individuals of a species could Gigantamax, and obtaining them required participating in special max raid battles, adding a layer of exclusivity. The mechanic was divisive. Some players loved the spectacle and the new strategies, while others felt it was gimmicky, but it showed that Game Freak was willing to experiment, to try new ideas even if they didn't always land. Paradox Pokemon, introduced in Scarlet and Violet, offered a different kind of alternate form, ancient or futuristic versions of existing species that seemed to come from other timelines. The ancient Paradox Pokemon in Scarlet had primal, prehistoric designs, creatures like Great Tusk, which resembled a woolly Donphan, or Roaring Moon, which looked like a feral Salamence. The future Paradox Pokemon in Violet were mechanical and sleek. Creatures like Iron Treads, a robotic Donphan, or Iron Valiant, a streamlined fusion of Gardevoir and Galad. These Pokemon had lore, suggesting they were brought to the present through a time machine hidden in a crater at the center of Paldea, and their existence raised questions about the nature of reality in the Pokemon world, about whether time travel was possible, about what other secrets might be hidden beneath the surface. The post-game content in Pokemon games has always been where the most dedicated players spend hundreds of hours, long after the main story is complete and the credits have rolled. The Battle Tower and its various iterations, the Battle Frontier, the Battle Tree, the Battle Subway, these are facilities designed to test your skills against challenging opponents with optimized teams, offering rare items and rewards for those who can win consistently. Completing the Pokédex, catching every single Pokémon available in a generation, is a monumental task that requires patience and dedication, trading with other players to obtain version exclusives, breeding to fill in gaps, transferring from previous games, or Pokémon Go. Some players breed for perfect stats, spending days hatching eggs until they get the right nature in IVs. Others hunt for shinies, resetting their games thousands of times for a single alternate color. And some simply explore, finding every hidden item, talking to every NPC, uncovering every secret the game has to offer. Mystery Gift, a feature that uses online connectivity to distribute special Pokemon and items, has been a staple since the second generation, offering players limited time rewards that can't be obtained through normal gameplay. These distributions are often tied to real-world events, movie releases, tournaments, anniversaries, and obtaining them feels special, like being part of a moment in the franchise's history. Event-exclusive Pokemon, legendary creatures that were never available through normal play, became highly sought after, and players who missed the distribution windows had no way to complete their collections legally, leading to a thriving black market for hacked Pokemon. In recent years, Game Freak has been better about re-releasing old event Pokemon, giving new players a chance to catch up, but the sense of scarcity and exclusivity still drives much of the collecting culture. The mythology of Ultra Beasts in Sun and Moon offered a glimpse at creatures that existed outside the normal rules of the Pokemon world, beings from other dimensions that didn't fit into the established categories. Nihiligo resembled a parasitic jellyfish, capable of merging with hosts. Buzzwole was a muscular mosquito that flexed constantly. Pheromosa moved with grace and refused to touch anything it considered dirty. Circuitry existed as pure electricity given form. Celesteela looked like a bamboo rocket. Cortana was made of folded paper and could slice through anything. Guzzlord was a walking black hole. Each Ultra Beast came from a world where it was normal, not a monster or anomaly, just another inhabitant of its dimension, and they were pulled through Ultra wormholes into Alola against their will. This made them tragic in a sense, displaced beings who just wanted to return home, and the game treated them with compassion, tasking you with capturing and returning them rather than simply destroying them as threats. Necrozma, the light-devouring Pokémon that served as the third legendary in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, the enhanced versions released in November 2017, was presented as a being that had once provided light to Alola, but had been injured and corrupted, now desperately consuming light to ease its pain. Its base form looked incomplete, all sharp angles and crystalline structure, and it could fuse with Solgaleo or Lunala to become Duskmane Necrozma or Dawn Wings Necrozma, gaining new types and abilities. Its ultimate form, Ultra Necrozma, required a special Z crystal and transformed it into a blinding dragon that radiated light in all directions, one of the most difficult battles in the series, a challenge that required careful preparation and strategy. The story of Necrozma added depth to the Alola region, recontextualizing events from Sun and Moon and revealing that the light people took for granted had a cost, that someone had suffered to provide it. The Crown Tundra, the second expansion for Sword and Shield, released in October 2020, introduced Dynamax Adventures, a co-op mode where you and 3 other players explored randomly generated dens, battling Pokémon and catching them along the way, with the chance to encounter and catch legendary Pokémon from previous generations at the end. This mode was addictive, offering a mix of strategy and luck, requiring communication and teamwork, and it gave players a way to obtain dozens of legendaries that had been unavailable in Galar. The Galarian Star Tournament, a post-game battle facility where you teamed up with various characters from the story to fight in double battles, offered a more personal challenge, letting you see familiar faces again and interact with them in new contexts. The Isle of Armor, the first expansion released in June 2020, focused on training and growth, introducing a dojo where you learned new battle techniques and bonded with your Pokémon through shared experiences. The expansion also introduced Kubfu, a fighting-type Pokémon that could evolve into Urshifu, a species with 2 different forms depending on which tower you chose to challenge. Single Strike style, a fighting and dark type that emphasized offense, or Rapid Strike style, a fighting and water type that focused on speed and precision. This choice felt meaningful, giving weight to your decision, and Urshifu became a competitive staple, a powerful Pokémon with unique moves and strong stats. Slowly, the story widens as we remember how the anime shaped perceptions of what Pokémon could be beyond the games themselves. The original series, which began with Ash leaving Pallet Town and receiving a disobedient Pikachu from Professor Oak, established patterns that would repeat across multiple regions and hundreds of episodes. Ash was perpetually 10 years old, a narrative choice that allowed him to remain relatable to young viewers generation after generation, even as the audience aged and moved on. His companions changed with each region, Misty and Brock in Kanto, and Johto, May, and Max in Hoenn, Dawn in Sinnoh, each bringing their own goals and personalities, their own arcs that played out alongside Ash's journey to become a Pokémon master. These companions weren't just sidekicks, they had dreams of their own. Misty wanted to become a water Pokémon master, Brock dreamed of being a great Pokémon breeder, May discovered her love for Pokémon contests, Dawn pursued a career as a top coordinator, and their struggles and growth added emotional depth to to the series. The Pokemon League tournaments at the end of each region became climactic events where Ash would battle against skilled trainers from around the world, showcasing strategies and Pokemon that viewers had never seen before. These tournaments were thrilling, filled with unexpected defeats and triumphant victories, and they showed that Ash, despite his experience, was still learning, still growing, still capable of making mistakes. His losses in these tournaments became legendary among fans, moments of heartbreak where he came so close to achieving his dream but fell short, often due to a single critical mistake or an opponent's superior strategy. In the Sinnoh League, he made it to the top four before losing to Tobias, a mysterious trainer who used legendary Pokemon like Darkrai and Latios, an opponent so overpowered that losing to him felt almost inevitable. In the Kalos League, he reached the finals and lost to Alen in a battle that came down to the wire, a defeat that devastated fans who had been rooting for him to finally win after decades of trying. The Alola series marked a significant departure from the formula, with the Ash enrolling in a Pokemon school rather than traveling from town to town, spending more time building relationships with a core group of classmates and less time chasing badges. The series explored different aspects of Pokemon culture, focusing on the trials and traditions unique to Alola, and it gave Ash more time to develop his team, to train and bond with each member in ways that previous series hadn't allowed. The art style changed as well, becoming rounder and more expressive, a shift that divided fans, but ultimately served the lighter, more comedic tone of the Alola series. And at the end of it all, Ash finally won, defeating Gladion in the Alola League finals and becoming the first ever Alola champion, a moment that felt earned after 20 years of near misses and heartbreaking losses. Fans around the world celebrated, some with tears, some with disbelief, because it seemed like a chapter had finally closed, like Ash had achieved what he'd been chasing since 1997. But the story didn't end there, because the Journeys series, which began in November 2019, took Ash back to traveling across all regions, not just focusing on one, and introduced Go, a new companion whose goal was to catch every Pokemon in existence, to literally complete the Pokédex in a way that Ash had never prioritized. Go represented a different kind of player, someone who cared more about collecting than battling, and his presence added a new dynamic to the series. Journeys culminated in the Masters 8 tournament, a competition featuring the 8 strongest trainers in the world, including champions from every region and elite trainers like Cynthia and Lance and Diantha. Ash's journey through this tournament was his final test, his ultimate challenge, and when he defeated Leon, the undefeated champion of Galar, in an epic 6-on-6 battle, it felt like the culmination of everything the series had been building toward for 25 years. His Pikachu, the same partner who had shocked him on their first day together, landed the final blow, and the moment was poetic, a perfect circle that brought the story back to its beginning. The Pokémon movies, theatrical releases that expanded the franchise's storytelling beyond the weekly anime episodes, became annual events that explored grander themes and showcased legendary Pokémon in starring roles. The first movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back, released in Japan in July 1998 and in North America in November 1999, became a cultural phenomenon that grossed over $170 million worldwide. The film explored heavy themes for a children's movie, questions about identity and purpose, about what it means to be created rather than born, about whether artificial life has the same value as natural life. Mewtwo, cloned from the DNA of Mew and engineered to be the strongest Pokemon in existence, questioned its own existence, struggled with feelings of inferiority and rage, and sought to prove that clones were superior to originals by creating an army of cloned Pokémon and forcing them to battle their natural counterparts. The movie's climax, where Ash was turned to stone while trying to stop the fighting, and the tears of all the Pokémon, both clones and originals, brought him back to life, remains one of the most emotionally powerful moments in the franchise's history, a scene that made children cry in theaters around the world. The second movie, Pokémon the Movie 2000, released in Japan in July 1999 and internationally in July 2000, focused on Lugia and the legendary birds Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres, telling a story about the balance of nature and the consequences of disrupting it. A collector named Lawrence III sought to capture the three birds to lure out Lugia, believing that controlling these legendary creatures would make him the greatest collector in history. But his actions threw the world's climate into chaos, creating storms and disruptions that threatened all life. The film emphasized the interconnectedness of ecosystems, the idea that every creature, no matter how small, plays a role in maintaining balance, and it cast Ash as the chosen one, a human selected by prophecy to restore harmony. The movie was visually stunning, with sweeping orchestral music composed by Ralph Schuckett and fluid animation that brought the legendary Pokémon to life in ways the television series couldn't match, and it reinforced the mythic qualities of these creatures, their importance not just as powerful battlers, but as guardians of the natural world. The third movie, Pokémon 3 The Movie Spell of the Unknown, released in Japan in July 2000 and internationally in April 2001, took a more intimate approach, focusing on a young girl named Molly, whose father disappeared while researching the unknown, mysterious Pokémon that could warp reality. Grief-stricken and lonely, Molly's wishes were granted by the unknown, who created an illusory world where her father returned, where she lived in a crystal palace, where the legendary Pokémon Entei served as her protector. The unknown kidnapped Ash's mother and made her believe she was Molly's mother, trapping her in the illusion, and Ash had to venture into this dreamlike realm to rescue her. The film dealt with themes of loss and escapism, about the dangers of retreating into fantasy rather than facing painful reality, and it showed the unknown not as malicious beings, but as neutral forces responding to a child's desperate loneliness. The animation was particularly impressive, with the crystal structures spreading across the landscape like living organisms, with battles that took place on impossible terrain, and the emotional core of the story, a girl who just wanted her family back, gave the film a melancholy weight that lingered long after the credits rolled. As we drift a little deeper tonight, there's a gentle comfort in remembering how the movies continued to explore new corners of the Pokémon world, each one introducing legendary Pokémon and expanding the mythology in ways that enriched the overall franchise. Pokémon Forever, released in Japan in July 2001 and internationally in October 2002, featured Celebi, the time-traveling forest guardian, and told a story about environmental destruction and the consequences of exploiting nature for power. The film introduced a younger version of Professor Oak, showing him as a child who befriended Celebi, and it revealed that Ash's bond with Pokémon wasn't unique to his generation, that this connection had existed for as long as humans and Pokémon had coexisted. The villain, a masked figure called the Iron Masked Marauder, used a dark ball to corrupt and control Pokémon, turning Celebi into a monstrous weapon, and the visual of a corrupted legendary Pokémon, its eyes empty and its body twisted, was genuinely disturbing, a reminder that even the most powerful beings could be broken if subjected to enough cruelty. Pokémon Heroes, released in Japan in July 2002 and internationally in May 2003, was set in Alto Mare, a city inspired by Venice, filled with canals and ancient architecture, and it starred Latios and Latias, the Eon Pokémon who guarded the city's secret. The film had a dreamlike quality, with watercolor backgrounds and a softer animation style that gave it a distinctly European aesthetic, and the story revolved around protecting a powerful artifact called the Soul Dew from thieves who wanted to use it to control the city. The relationship between Ash and Latias was sweet and understated, with moments of connection that didn't require dialogue, and the ending, where Latias, or possibly a girl who looked like her, kissed Ash goodbye, left an audiences debating what had actually happened, whether the girl was real or if Latias had taken human form. The ambiguity was intentional, a rare moment of mystery in a franchise that usually explained everything explicitly, and it made the film feel more mature, more willing to let viewers draw their own conclusions. Jirachi Wishmaker, released in Japan in July 2003 and internationally in June 2004, focused on Jirachi, a Pokemon that awakened once every 1,000 years for 7 days to grant wishes. The film explored themes of friendship and sacrifice, about the pain of forming a bond with someone you know you'll have to say goodbye to, because Jirachi's awakening was temporary, and when the 7 days ended, it will return to sleep for another millennium. Max, one of Ash's companions during the Hoenn series, formed a close bond with Jirachi, and watching him prepare to lose his friend, knowing there was nothing he could do to stop it, added an emotional weight that elevated the film beyond simple adventure. The villains sought to use Jirachi's power to resurrect a legendary Pokemon called Groudon, but the creature he created was a corrupted imitation, a monster made of dark energy that threatened to consume everything, and the battle to stop it required Jirachi to sacrifice its remaining time awake to seal the threat away. Destiny Deoxys, released in Japan in July 2004 and internationally in January 2005, introduced Deoxys, an alien Pokemon formed from a virus exposed to a laser beam in space, and told a story about fear and misunderstanding, about how beings from different worlds might struggle to communicate. The film was set in a futuristic city filled with technology and security systems designed to protect against Pokemon attacks, and when Deoxys arrived searching for its friend, another Deoxys that had been separated from it years earlier, the city's defenses perceived it as a threat and attacked. Rayquaza, the Sky Guardian, also appeared, viewing Deoxys as an invader in its territory, and the conflict escalated until the city was caught in the crossfire between two incredibly powerful beings. The resolution came through understanding rather than violence, through recognizing that Deoxys wasn't hostile, just lost and searching, and the film reinforced a recurring theme in the Pokémon franchise, that most conflicts arise from miscommunication and fear of the unknown, rather than genuine malice. Lucario and the Mystery of Mew, released in Japan in July 2005 and internationally in September 2006, is often considered one of the best Pokemon movies, a film that balanced action, emotion, and mythology in nearly perfect proportions. The story revolved around Lucario, an aura-wielding Pokemon who had been sealed away for centuries after being betrayed by the human he served, and who awakened in the present day filled with anger and confusion. The film explored themes of loyalty and betrayal, about how misunderstandings can destroy relationships, about the pain of being judged unfairly for actions you didn't commit. Lucario and Ash formed a bond over the course of the film, two beings who understood loss and loyalty, and the ending, where Lucario sacrificed itself to save the Tree of Beginning and restore balance to the world, was devastating. Its final words, thanking Ash and admitting that it was glad to have met him, brought tears to audiences, and the film's willingness to end on a note of genuine tragedy rather than a safe, happy ending, showed a level of emotional maturity that surprised many viewers. Pokemon Ranger and the Temple of the Sea, released in Japan in July 2006 and internationally in March 2007, featured Manaphy, the Prince of the Sea, and told a story about protecting rare Pokemon from those who would exploit them. The film introduced the concept of Pokemon Rangers, trainers who worked to protect wild Pokemon rather than capturing them, and it showed a different kind of relationship between humans and Pokemon, one based on temporary partnership rather than permanent ownership. The villain, a pirate named Phantom, sought to use Manaphy to find the Sea Temple and claim its treasures, and the film's underwater sequences, with schools of Pokemon swimming through ancient ruins, were visually spectacular. The bond between May and Manaphy, a creature that imprinted on her as its parent, added emotional depth, and the scene where she had to let it go, returning it to the ocean where it belonged, paralleled the experience many players have when releasing Pokemon in the games, that bittersweet mixture of pride and sadness. The Rise of Darkrai, released in Japan in July 2007 and internationally in February 2008, introduced Darkrai, a Pokemon associated with nightmares, and played with the idea of a creature that was perceived as evil, but was actually trying to protect the town from a greater threat. Darkrai's appearance caused people and Pokemon to fall into deep sleeps filled with terrible dreams, and the townspeople blamed it for the disturbances, but in reality, it was warning them about the approaching conflict between Dialga and Palkia, two gods whose battle in an alternate dimension was causing rifts in space-time that threatened to tear the town apart. The film had a tragic ending, with Darkrai sacrificing itself to calm the feuding legendaries, absorbing their attacks to protect the town even though the people had never trusted it, and its final words, insisting that this place was its home and it would defend it, transformed the creature from a monster into a hero. The film asked audiences to reconsider their assumptions, to question whether beings that seemed frightening were truly dangerous or simply misunderstood. Giratina and the Sky Warrior, released in Japan in July 2008 and internationally in February 2009, delved into the distortion world, the antimatter dimension where Giratina lived, and explored the consequences of Dialga and Palkia's battle from the previous film. Their fight had poisoned Giratina's realm with toxic clouds, and the creature sought revenge, pursuing Dialga across dimensions and dragging Ash and his friends into the conflict. The film introduced Shaman, a small hedgehog-like Pokemon with the ability to purify toxins and transform into a more graceful sky form, and it served as the bridge between Giratina and the humans, helping them understand that Giratina wasn't evil, just angry and hurt, defending its home from invaders. The visuals in the distortion world were surreal, with gravity-defying architecture and impossible geometries, and the film reinforced the idea that legendary Pokemon weren't gods to be worshipped or monsters to be feared, but beings with their own motivations and struggles, capable of both destruction and compassion. Arceus and the Jewel of Life, released in Japan in July 2009 and internationally in November 2009, brought the Creation Trio storyline to a conclusion, introducing Arceus, the god Pokemon who had shaped the universe itself. The film told a story about broken promises and the danger of holding grudges across millennia, revealing that Arceus had been betrayed by a human it had trusted centuries ago, and now it sought to destroy humanity as punishment. Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina all appeared to stop Arceus, recognizing that its rage would consume everything if left unchecked, and the battles between these cosmic beings were appropriately epic, reality-warping conflicts that dwarfed anything the series had shown before. The resolution required Ash and his friends to travel back in time to prevent the original betrayal, to ensure that the promise was kept, and the film played with paradoxes and alternate timelines in ways that gave it a science fiction flavor unusual for the franchise. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed drifting through these quiet facts, there's another video waiting on the left of your screen. Maybe let it play while you rest. You might learn something new before you drift off again.